Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's presentation on recycling in Nebraska. My name is Patrick Gurney, and I am an AmeriCorps member serving with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. Conservation Nebraska's mission is to protect our state's natural legacy by educating the public, supporting communities, and increasing civic engagement, which we accomplish through locally led education efforts and community engagement projects to address local conservation concerns. Now, before I introduce tonight's speaker, there are a couple rules to go over. So for those joining, your cameras will remain off and you will be muted throughout the presentation. Please type any questions you have in the chat or in the Q&A section on Zoom, and we will answer those at some point during or after the presentation. Following the presentation, we will have a very brief survey that should only take about less than a minute to complete. This survey helps us support programming like this one, and we really appreciate you taking the time to fill those out. So tonight we will welcome Haley Nolde. Haley is the former executive director of Nebraska Recycling Council. She's still working part-time to assist in wrapping up grants and transition with the new director, Kimberly. Haley has been with the organization for 5 years and has experience assisting communities, working on legislation, research, collaboration, and talking trash. She's optimistic about improving recycling in rural areas. Haley now lives in South Dakota, where she's working for her master's degree and part-time work as the sustainability coordinator for her campus.
Awesome. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Sweet. Okay. Well, thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be here. Like you mentioned, I am the former executive director, but I love getting the opportunity to still talk about some of the projects that I was part of. And I'm always happy to talk about the Nebraska Recycling Council. So, what is the Nebraska Recycling Council? This picture here is our lovely new executive director, Kim, with a handful of our board members. And our mission is really to maximize the economic and environmental benefits of resource recovery in Nebraska. That sounds very formal. So what does that actually mean? The doing behind what do we do? So out in the public with outreach and education, that can look like from left to right on the top there. We helped a small community in Southeast Nebraska look at their recycling stream to identify what contaminants they had and help improve some problems they had going on. We testify on different legislation at the Capitol. We host events. That picture there is a clothing swap in conjunction with Lincoln Earth Day. We host training courses. In the top right was a compost operator training course. And that's really important to the organization that we are offering those type of services to the community. And then on the bottom row, going back the other way, we were at First Star Fiber recycling facility in Omaha. And then we attend different national conferences, the two gals in the hard hats there. And that's another thing that is really important to us is maintaining our professional development to make sure that, we know what we're talking about. If people are calling on us to be the experts on different subjects, we need to maintain or stay on top of industry trends and best practices. We do host our own conferences too, pictured there, and we do a lot of collaboration with other entities, such as the City of Lincoln. And then maybe more things that are behind the desk type activities is these resources that we develop. We have tons of publications that we've produced over the years related to a variety of topics and projects. It can vary from textile waste and recycling to grain bag recycling. If you think those big polypropylene sacks that you see in fields covering different products. We investigate different areas of the state to see how we can best assist. And then even projects like the feedlot composting project, where we were looking at the feasibility of municipalities working with local, essentially local feedlots working with local farmers to produce a high valuable compost that can then be sold or then spread on that ag ground, kind of closing the loop and keeping food waste out of the landfill. And then technical assistance things. So this relates maybe to our members or specific phone calls that we get from the public with technical needs that they need for their community. But here's just some examples. BVH Architecture wanted a recommendation report of things that they could improve within their office building. And then Emeritus is another of our members that we created this graphic for so that then they can communicate with their customers on how much their recycling efforts benefit the environment. And then, of course, we want to stay active in advocacy and state collaboration. So that can range anything from participating in climate action planning to supporting things like a waste characterization study. I'm not intending anyone to be able to read these graphics on the screen, but these are just to show some of the official documents that we're involved with. And then maybe one of our most recent activities was helping with Legislative Resolution 163, which was an interim study looking at how we can improve recycling around the state. So we did some of the legwork on the research for that. And now getting into the presentation itself, kind of what are we really talking about tonight? I want to mention first that I have no problem if anyone has any questions as I'm going through the material, please ask it and interrupt, that's okay. And I can answer that. It might make sense to answer questions as we go just because of the content and nature of the material to address those things as we're going. I have no problem stopping. So what is sustainable material management? Well, this definition was pulled from the EPA, but the NRC aligns with the definition, and it really is a systematic approach of using and reusing material more productively over the entire life cycle. Meaning, exemplified in the waste management hierarchy, is that ideally, as much as we can, we source, reduce, and reuse. And while our name states that we're the Nebraska Recycling Council, that's always what we'll advocate first is source reduction and reuse, and then we would move to the other options, starting with recycling and composting. And that waste management hierarchy is also modeled after how the EPA describes. And I threw this biomimicry definition in there because it relates to the thesis research I'm doing here at the University of South Dakota. And really, my point in bringing that up is that when we look to nature as a model for how we should be managing our waste, there really is no waste in nature. So it is exciting to think that we can use that as a model in biomimetic activities to get us away from this wasteful society that we have created. And how much waste are we talking about? A lot. So the amount of material that enters Nebraska landfills each day is enough to fill every single seat at Memorial Stadium every day. So this is a large volume of material that actually a significant amount of it could have been recycled, but instead we are landfilling it. This is a picture I just like to share. It's from a famous wildlife photographer, Joel Sartori. He works for National Geographic. He actually lives in Lincoln and took this photo, and he was trying to show the impacts that we have that we don't always see is the interaction that these starlings that we have with these starlings. They are sifting through our trash to try to find food. Why should we recycle? I know this isn't necessarily the point of the webinar, but I think it's important to just have a few reminders and touch on economics of recycling. And so recycling creates 9 times more jobs than landfilling, and that statistic on the side there is associated with the recycling jobs in Nebraska. That comes from the Institute of Scrap Recycling from 2021. That doesn't include the economic activity associated with the material itself. So when we're sending aluminum to an end market, that's not included in this figure. So it is significantly more than what these numbers even show. Getting back into the reasons, the resource conservation is really important, especially to the state of Nebraska. And it's important to keep these things local and not rely so much on virgin feedstock for our products. And then a circular economy is achieved when materials are returned. And this is kind of what I was touching on earlier, that we need to move away from that linear economy of make, take, use, dispose that depends on landfills. And I will mention landfills are extremely important for health and safety reasons, but we shouldn't rely on them as the only way to manage our waste because they take land out of ag production, can contaminate the environment, they produce greenhouse gases, devalue surrounding areas, and much more. So getting into the challenges, the heart of what we're talking about in the title of tonight's webinar, I chose a few because I didn't want to bore anyone to death. I chose a few to talk about, and one of those being the complexity of materials. So to give an example, paper and cardboard, let's say, needs to stay relatively clean and dry. So pop getting spilt on a bunch of recycling really isn't the best thing because it's extremely hard to then recycle that paper after it's been wet and it's sticky and yucky. But let's take glass on the other hand, for example. And oftentimes glass in Nebraska is crushed in a bunker out back at some facility, a concrete bunker, and it can be left for years more just out in the elements. So each material needs to be treated a little bit differently, and acknowledging that is important and often becomes a challenge. Contamination is a challenge. This can be thought of what I was just talking about with uh, food or liquid or whatever spilling on the recyclables. That's kind of what we traditionally think of as contamination, but it can also look like, the jerk that leaves his recliner at the drop-off site. That's just really illegal dumping at that point. It can also be when people wish cycle. So what that means is someone is putting materials in the bin that they either think can be recycled or really want them to be recycled. They want someone down the line to be able to figure out something to do with it. But at the end of the day, if your facility doesn't take those materials, they're going to end up landfilled anyways. And then another is misinformation. This is not unique to Nebraska. Not unique to our state or our country, really. There's a lot of misinformation around the globe as to what is actually happening with recyclables. Cost is another one, or maybe the perceptions of cost of, that recycling may be too expensive, or how to figure those things into a budget for municipalities. And we can touch on this in a moment. Hauler issues. When we think of the state, I think it's important that we look at this chart here that shows that the majority of our communities have less than 800 people in them. And so that creates challenges. Nebraska geography and hauler issues kind of go together, that the volume of materials is relatively low in those communities, and it becomes disproportionately more expensive for those communities to recycle because they are moving less material of their distance. And then even going outside of Nebraska, the markets where we're sending these recyclables are often hundreds of miles away. And so the rural geography creates a large challenge. And I'm going to pause and change how I'm displaying information just for a little switch up. I know we've all had PowerPoint after PowerPoint, especially after COVID. So I'm going to show our story map. And this is something that I've shared. Anytime I get the opportunity, I will share this because I think it's a really useful tool for a variety of applications. Essentially, it's taking geographic points and data that are tied to those geo points, and you can make all types of maps that I'll get to in a second. For a little context with this information, I thought it would be really great to bring forward the data and comments and things like that from the municipalities themselves. What have we heard all around the state that are the challenges? Because it's easy for us to sometimes think that we know what other communities are dealing with, or we can make educated guesses, but it's really important to highlight the voices of those actually moving the material. So context, this has been going on for since 2017, 2018 time. We have contacted municipalities to try to extract information related to whether or not they have recycling, do they have composting, what are local entities that they work with, uh, all types of questions, anything related to their waste management. This is the only data of its kind available in the state. And so it has been used by policymakers, environmental organizations, the state government, in a variety of ways. It's really useful information, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time because this is available publicly. I don't know if, Kim, if you're able to share this. Patrick, was there a question?
Yes, there was actually a question in the chat. Someone is asking if there are any requirements for towns of a certain size to provide recycling.
No.
Okay. And
Um,
Kimberly posted in the chat a link, which I'm sure you can use.
I'm assuming it's probably to this story map.
Yes.
Okay, I won't spend a ton of time on this. I just wanted to pull out some of the highlights that relate to those challenges I just brought up from the PowerPoint. Was that it, Patrick, on questions?
Um, there are hands raised uh
Oh,
in the webinar currently, but
um, what is it? 6:18. We can pause for a second, answer questions. Do you want me
yeah,
to?
for those who raise their hand, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask right now, or if you're unable to speak, you can put them in the chat right now and we can answer them.
Okay, I'll answer the wish cycling one. The legislative one I'll maybe save to the end. From Kat on wish cycling, I think a lot of the issue comes from people are getting their information. They're doing their due diligence on what should be recycled, but that information is coming from somewhere outside of their local facility. So to be, the best recycler you can, you really want to use the information that your local facility provides you, because they're the best resource to know of course, what they can and can't recycle. Additionally, another problem is that a lot of people see the chasing arrows symbol on their products, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's recyclable. Um, where you're at, that just is indicating, for plastic, let's say, that's indicating what resin type the plastic is made out of. So it doesn't always mean that it's recyclable. Unfortunately, wish cycling is a problem, and it's going to have to take the individual contacting their local facility.
I
Um,
just have something real quick. I apologize if there was any confusion there. The question for that answer was how we suggest minimizing wish cycling. Someone was asking in the chat what the question was that you were answering.
oh, okay. And then this compost one, Karina, maybe you can throw some information in the chat related to how many compost stations are there? This could help alleviate garbage. I don't have the answer on how many compost facilities, but one of our program directors, this is her bread and butter, so I'll let her answer that in the chat. Again, the question was how many compost stations are there? This could help alleviate garbage, which is exactly right. There is a lot of food waste in our waste stream. Okay, I'm gonna carry on with the story map. So what this map is showing, and like I said, all of these points come from a specific answer from that community. If you do not see your community on here, it's because we haven't heard from your municipality. So if you are involved with the local government in any way, that would be amazing if you could get into contact with us. But you can click on any of these and find out the information for that local community, where they take their recyclables, whether or not they have recycling, and what this map is showing is everyone in red does not have recycling or ended it at some time. And that's about a third of the state. A third of the people that we've heard from do not have recycling, unfortunately. And this is showing where the recycling sites, and these are hub and spoke models. The idea behind hub and spoke is that the hub is typically a larger community central to a bunch of smaller communities that they can then bring their material to that larger facility to create some efficiencies, like what I was mentioning with rural. Not every community needs to take their recycling all the way to the end market. Trying to consolidate as close to the point of collection as possible is best practice. And getting into some of those issues, like I said, I wanted to highlight what we're hearing from the municipalities around the state. Some of the themes, like I had mentioned with this, is the no hauler, that they want to recycle, there's just not a hauler available to take their material. A lot of people said, about 30% said that it became too expensive, and they quoted certain costs for that material. And jumping into costs, that was actually mentioned. Cost, money, or funding was mentioned 50 separate times in the 2022 survey. And it's often not justifiable for a really small community to uh, pay for the recycling program when other communities are using it. So this is a problem we see a lot, is one community has a recycling trailer that they pay for the hauling of, but then surrounding community members, residents from surrounding communities who don't have recycling bring their recycling there, which of course we want to recycle as much as material as possible, but then it makes that disproportionately much more expensive for that one community. So we always advocate for interlocal agreements, trying to establish these formal hub and spoke models so that it spreads the cost of of moving the material. Service options, I'll show this graph of the issue with haulers. So the vast majority of people who have recycling only have one option for a hauler. Which of course creates a lot of challenges in itself, because if that hauler decides to stop hauling for you, then your recycling program is done. Also, things associated with cost, you don't really have an option to, go with someone cheaper. And then contamination was another big one. If anyone wants to read this after the webinar, you're welcome to. But something I want to pull out of this is contamination was often thought, even from the clerks, and what we initially thought going into this research is that it was just lack of understanding from the community members. But really, it seemed like a lot of the contamination and reasons for closures was because of illegal dumping. So it was the bad apples in the bunch that ruined it for everybody else, and that these communities throughout this whole project, and even now, the we're not lacking in desire to recycle. It's just overcoming these challenges. A lot of the communities were expressing to us and still do that they want recycling back. They just have trouble addressing things like illegal dumping. So getting into recommendations that we have, like I mentioned, hub and spoke is a really good model when like I've brought up the rural community issue. Another thing that, like I was mentioning with paper, is sometimes a community has so few residents that they don't have enough material that accumulates. And you really don't want paper and cardboard and things like that sitting for months at a time. And so consolidating the material, again, advocating for hub and spoke. And here's a variety of reasons of other benefits related to it. We actually have a whole hub and spoke publication linked here if anyone wants to read that. Something I haven't touched on is turnover rates, and it is a significant challenge. We advise people to create these plans so that when someone either retires or leaves or whatever happens, that someone is either cross-trained on how to do things, or there's some type of plan after that individual retires. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of programs go under because there was just that one guy that knew everything about the recycling program, and then when he retires, it disappears because no one else had been trained properly. So that's an easy way to avoid those types of challenges. And then avoiding illegal dumping and contamination. We've seen a variety of takes on this from communities. Sometimes they will have the facility fenced off so that it's only open a certain amount of hours in the week, and there's either a city employee there, or they have volunteers such as Boy Scouts or a green team or whatever come in, man the facility at that time. We've seen them move trailers to more well-lit, well-trafficked areas so that that deters people to leave their recliners at the drop-offs. And additionally, surveillance cameras and things like that have been used. I'm going to jump back into the PowerPoint. And I want to end on bringing up that these are challenges, but we have the tools to address them. And one of these points is to change the narrative that we should see these as areas for improvement. We can improve them. We can make this better. It just takes a lot of collaboration around the state. So reporting requirements is a large one. I know someone asked in the chat, are certain municipalities required to provide recycling? No, and even the ones that have recycling don't have to report anything. That's not entirely true. Sometimes when, the communities have grant-funded equipment or grant-funded projects or something of that nature, they do have to report for a certain amount of time, but that's not continuous. And so the reporting requirement problem leads into the problem with investments in infrastructure, because without reporting requirements, it's almost like we don't know what we don't know, because we don't have an accurate idea of the numbers for these things. So attracting investments, whether that be small local investments, $5,000 for a piece of equipment, or national grants investing in the state. We really need sound data to make our state attractive. And localize some of those markets so that we're not sending our material hundreds of miles away. That kind of defeats the purpose of, trying to protecting the environment. While keeping it in the economic stream is also always beneficial. We don't then want to send it hundreds of miles away. So, education and outreach is another big one. This is never going to go away. I don't think we're always going to need to share, the best practices and industry trends and updates. And with education, we should aim, NRC, myself, other entities around the state to use standardized material. The question on wish cycling is a good one because if each person in each community is sharing a little bit different education or a little bit different standards, it becomes very confusing. When you think of traveling or moving, we really need to have some type of standard across the board, and that's what NRC advocates for. The most important one that I will mention, and if you remember anything from this webinar tonight, it would be that we need to change the waste narrative. What I mean by that is historically it's waste management and what do we do with all of this garbage? But really a lot of what we are landfilling, what this garbage is economically valuable material. And that's why I dropped that recent post that came out that Iowa dumped an estimated $100 million worth of recyclables in 2022. They are pretty comparable to Nebraska in a variety of ways related to waste management. And so I can't imagine that that's very far off from Nebraska. So changing this narrative, how we think about waste, that it's an opportunity to grow and an opportunity to stimulate the economy in the state and stop filling up, our state with landfills. Collaboration and strategic planning is huge. We can't accomplish everything as siloed entities. This webinar right now, Conservation Nebraska and Nebraska Recycling Council working together. It goes a long way and helps with some of the standardization and communicating the same messages across the state. And then understanding costs. So what I'll mention here, because I want to leave time for questions, is that we are going to pay to have our material landfilled, or we're going to have to pay to have it recycled. And so there's a lot of hidden costs with landfilling that we don't think about. For example, I don't know if Willa's on the call tonight, but she shared that the next cell to open up at Bluff Road Landfill in Lincoln is going to cost $10 million. And the trend around the state is that these cells that, it's just another section that's opened up at the landfill, they aren't lasting as long as we project them to. So they're actually, it's more expensive than we even predict because they're not lasting. We're filling them up too quickly. And so if you think of it that way, it kind of changes the way you think about recycling, that we are diverting this material so that we, the public doesn't have to pay for a $10 million extension of the landfill. So understanding the cost is really a challenge and takes explanation with people, but I think once you think of it that way, it changes the way we look at it. Last thing I'll mention is we are about done with a project that took about a year to come up with and plan and talk to people, and then another year to actually come up with the material. And those are our municipal waste reduction toolkits. This was funded by the Department of Environment and Energy, and it is just what it says. It's going to have a variety of topics included, everything from what you need to know if you want to have a compost site, what type of regulations exist and what you need to do with the state, all the way to standardization for education or where to put your bins and things like that. So it should be a really comprehensive tool, and we felt that this was needed in our state because NRC is a very small team and there is not enough of us to spread around the state for all the communities that need assistance with their programs. And so this will be available before the end of the year. We're working on the finishing touches of the final draft, but it'll be available on our website and will be sent to all the municipal clerks around the state. And here is how you can get in touch. This is my personal email. If you want to email me, that's fine. If you want to get in touch with NRC, there's the email for them. Either way, you'll find the right person somehow. And I am happy to answer questions, expand on any of the topics brought up, go back to the story map, anything that might be useful.
Thank you so much. Before we get into the final questions and points made by people, I'm going to launch this feedback survey. Like I said before, this should take less than a minute to complete, and we really appreciate you completing this survey. Okay, yes, there were a few questions in the Q&A section still unanswered, and also in the webinar chat there were a few points made and a couple of links from Karina and Kimberly.
Okay, let me open up the questions. For materials that degrade with each use, like plastic, how can we maximize their reuse? I'm writing a final term paper on this right now. So the problem with plastic is that the polymers of the plastic degrade every time we want to recycle it. Every time we do recycle it, I should say. So plastic can only be recycled so many times before it degrades to a point where it's not usable anymore and requires virgin material from crude oil to improve the structure of the plastic, essentially. While we're using plastic, I think what this question's referring to is microplastics, maybe. Maximizing the reuse takes some creativity sometimes. I know there's a lot of resources online on how to reuse certain materials. The best advice I can have is stay away from plastic as much as possible. It is absolutely necessary in some situations. You think of healthcare, things like that, but minimizing our use of single-use plastics is the best strategy that I can share. Okay, this one's on recycling not making it to their end facility, be that municipalities or service providers. Understanding these distrusts and aside from expressing the high financial cost, how can we best influence others to make the frankly complicated effort to learn about services that might be available and reach out to them? So when we're talking to others, I think something that I've found really useful to share with them is that the recycling facilities want your material. They don't make money if they send it to the landfill. In fact, they're paying to have it landfilled, just like any other person that pays the tipping fee. So the recycling facilities where your recyclables are going want the material and they want it to go to the appropriate place. There are absolutely instances where recycling isn't landfilled, and it's important to know what is factual. And in those cases, it's often because the material is so contaminated or it contains so much garbage or so much unrecyclable material that it would cost too much to sort through that material to find the valuable items in it. That makes sense. So explaining these things to people, that if we cleaned up our recycling stream, it would make it a lot easier for these things to actually be recycled. But all in all, the recycling is worth money. And so the people at the end of the line, they do want that material to go to the right place. How do we attract haulers to the state legislature? What grants do we look for? Attracting haulers to the state, I think some of this this is kind of a complicated answer because no two recycling programs are the same. So the issue with haulers sometimes can be alleviated just by the municipality setting aside in the budget that they're going to have one of their let's say public works department people start hauling the material. But that's where it gets into the strategic planning and budgeting process that the municipality needs to take this on as a serious endeavor and formal arrangements for how to handle this material. Um, I don't know that we'd necessarily need to attract haulers from out of state because a lot of the material currently is being moved by I don't know if Spud's on the webinar tonight, but Spud Rally in Western Nebraska hauls, I think, for well over a dozen communities himself. And so it relies on a lot of just single individuals doing this as uh, their own business. Um, why is Lincoln closing more recycling sites around town? If Willa's on the call, maybe we'll have her put it in the chat. I think from what I understand, and I should be repeating these questions for everybody. The city of Lincoln is closing recycling sites around town because they're trying to consolidate that, and I believe it was a budget issue. And maybe contamination was going on with the certain sites that they're closing. So Willa or anyone with the city, if you want to drop information related to that or anyone that knows. And then interested in any outcomes from LB 163. Kim, if you want to chime in at any point in the chat. So LB 163 was looking at essentially how we can elevate economics in, oh, chat members can't see the chat. Okay, I apologize. Essentially, 163 was an interim study in the summer that we did for Senator Jana Hughes to elevate the economic view of recyclables. And what came out of that was essentially, in short, extended producer responsibility was a big one that was kind of a running theme for recommendations, and that is currently being discussed between a variety of entities in the state on how we want to approach that. But that's essentially extended producer responsibilities when you hold the producers accountable for all or at least some of the cost to recycle. So this means that whatever proportion, in simple terms, whatever proportion of Coke products are sold in the state of Nebraska, Coke would then be required to pay a certain amount to make sure those were recycled. So this has been implemented in Colorado, and I'm happy to talk maybe after the webinar more about EPR. But in short, that's kind of what came out of LB 163, but it was really exciting to see this as a formal discussion with the legislature and time set aside to research these different topics. Will we be sending slides to participants via email? I'd like to have the info and wasn't able to take notes as I was listening to the webinar as I drove. Yes, I don't, well, I can send them to Conservation Nebraska, and then I suppose they could send those, or you can email me. My email's on the screen. I don't know if you can see it, and I'd be happy to share that with you. And Karina, it doesn't look like the question that someone asked about compost facilities in the state. Perhaps if you could shoot me an email after the webinar, and I can get you in touch with Karina, and she can give you all of that information. I didn't realize that everyone couldn't see the same chat messages.
I can post the link in the chat.
Okay, cool.
I apologize.
That's okay.
If you are typing on Zoom, it will initially have it setting to panelists and hosts you're sending the messages to, but you have to select to have it sent to everyone. So I posted that link in the chat just now about the composting resources.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions or anything from the slides that I can bring back up and further expand on? I'd be happy to do that, or questions that maybe topics I didn't cover. Um, Now is the time. Okay, well, I think,
Okay, I think that might be it for questions. Thank you so much again, Haley, for coming and speaking on this topic.
of course. Thanks everyone that came, and you can watch our website for oh, there's a question. How do you dispose of used fry pans non-stick? That's a good question. Um, I mean, if they're still usable, I would consider donating them. But depending on the material, you could contact your recycling facility and see if they would be interested in that metal, depending on whatever the material is.
Okay, thank you so much, Haley.
Yeah, thank you.